Hey guys, I'm here to talk about the 4 books I read in September and also the books I'm excited to read next. If I had several brains to read with, I actually was going to skip this month and just include these 4 books in my October books video, but my personality would not allow me to skip a video or skip a month. Also, I do think I have a good amount to say about these books. So the first book I finished in September was The Dose Effect by TJ Power, and it is a nonfiction book. I borrowed a physical copy from the library, so I don't have it here to show you because I've already returned it. Most of it I read in August, so it has been a while, but I'll do my best to summarize. So the term dose is an acronym for the happy hormones, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. The beginning of the book explains how people in modern society are not as happy as past societies were because our happy hormones have been hijacked. People are no longer getting as much physical movement in their day-to-day lives. People live very fast-paced lives. They're spending more time alone. There's less community, not getting enough outdoor time, sunlight. I don't think people should feel shamed for these circumstances because it almost feels as if life is set up for it to be this way. People have to work and the majority of them do have to sit for most of the day. They're exhausted. They don't want to get their heart rate up and go for a run after work. Who has time to sit in the sunlight and socialize every single day? I think what this book does well is it doesn't shame. Instead, it explains in very accessible terms what these happy hormones are, why we need them, and very practical ways to attain healthy levels of them, things that you can do in your day-to-day routines. For example, taking a cold shower in the morning can release endorphins and dopamine. Okay, but no one wants to take a cold shower. Instead, you can take your usual warm shower and at the very end, rinse with very cold water and do that for about 15 seconds. Start there. Sometimes I get comments from people saying that they don't have the concentration to read for very long. After a page, their mind wanders or they get bored. So he writes about entering flow state. If you're used to getting that easy, constant hit of dopamine from, say, scrolling on social media, it's going to become harder to focus on things that do not give that immediate dopamine hit. I don't like saying that you need to train yourself to read because that makes reading seem unenjoyable. So many readers, including myself, have never had to train themselves to read. It's a form of entertainment for us, and I think it's because we enter flow state faster. That moment when everything falls away and you're just focused on the story, it doesn't even feel like you're reading and looking at a page. But I can understand if you're not used to that happening, you're not going to expect it to happen. And maybe you decide to quit before you can enter that flow state. I think he recommends keeping at it for at least 15 minutes before giving up. I mean, it's not just about reading. He's talking about other things you can concentrate on. For serotonin, he recommends seeing sunlight as soon as you wake up, spending time in nature, going on phone-free walks. For endorphins, he talks about laughter. He mentions singing to yourself, whether it sounds good or bad, maybe in the car. I'm sure you get the idea. Very practical tips that anyone can implement in their daily lives. I did like this book, however, I found it a bit too self-evident. He gives tips that I think most people already know, like we need sunlight, we need less screen time, we need to exercise. I did appreciate the reinforcement and reminder, however, it's not a book I can say changed my life. I actually think that this could be a good read for young people, maybe middle school age, people who are starting to figure out a healthy dynamic to have with their smartphones, their homework, their hobbies, their friendships. I think these tips could be helpful for them as they grow up and become adults. Something to keep in mind. But if you're interested in this topic and you want easy ways to boost your mood, increase your focus, sleep better, bond with people, then I think this is an easy low-lift read. I can't remember why I put a hold on this at the library. I vaguely remember maybe a few videos ago I asked for nonfiction recommendations, and I do think this was a recommendation I saw. I went through and I checked which of the recommendations were available at my library immediately, and maybe this was one of them. So whoever it was that recommended it, I did end up reading it, and thank you for the recommendation. I enjoyed it. The next book I read was Katalin Street by Magda Szabo. Phenomenal. I love this so much. It did take me quite a long time to read because after each chapter I would pause for a bit. It's also a horrific tragedy of a story, so I did tiptoe my way through it. So this book is about 3 families, the Elekeshes, the Biras, and the Helds. All 3 families live right next to each other in Budapest, and they're all very close with one another, especially the children. In the beginning, I was a little lost because it seemed that there were so many characters being thrown at me at once, and it was hard to figure out who was family members of which family at first. I also thought for some reason the story was going to be about the parents instead of the children. What I did to help was I made kind of a chart of the families and the members in each. I don't think that's necessary though, because as the story goes on, you do familiarize yourself with the children. So there's Irene and Blanca Elekesh, Henriette Held, and Balint Bira. Hopefully I'm I'm saying those names correctly, there is a pronunciation guide in this copy, which I was very thankful for. So the time frame of the story extends from pre-World War II all the way to its aftermath. And if you don't know, Hungary was an ally to the Axis powers, and then at some point they switched sides, but then Germany ended up taking over, occupying Hungary. From then on, the country became like the fighting grounds between Germany and the Soviet Union. Hungary is caught in between until the Soviet Union was able to take over. And for a pretty long time after the war, the Soviet Union basically controlled Hungary. The characters are all in Budapest, so they're in the midst of it. Something tragic happens to these children, and the plot spins like a vortex around it. The story will switch from the past to them as children to the future when they are much older adults. We know pretty early on what happens to some of these characters, and then we go back in time to see it happen in real time. And from the beginning, there is a character who is observing the others as a ghost. I won't say who because some may consider that a spoiler, even though you do learn pretty early on. That character haunts the narrative as this mournful, regretful ghost, moving from place to place, going to observe the people who are still alive, and then going to this obscure other place to meet the people who have died as well. That made the story much more interesting and introspective, but it also added another layer of indelible pain. Also, to great effect, it illustrates how trauma can haunt. I really loved this book, and 90% of the reason why is because of Szabo's writing. I feel she is top of her game in this. I love each of her books for different reasons, but all of them have her creativity, her craft, her discernment, her acuity. She's so sharp and insightful, and she understands a lot about history and people, but her knowledge isn't thrown into the story in a heavy-handed way. Like, the threads that she's weaving together are very fine. In the end, the piece comes out more intricate, more beautiful, more impactful, more painful. It's very impressive what she does. So I did a short form review of this, and I mentioned something that I found interesting, which is that the story switches between narrators, and as each character is narrating, we are privy to their emotions and their feelings, their private thoughts, but everyone's part is told in third person except for Iraine, who is the oldest Alakesh sister. Her part is told in first person. I would say all four of the children were main characters, so I found it interesting that Magda Szabo chose to highlight Iraine's section like that, or maybe why Len Ricks chose to translate it as such. However, I don't think a translator would take that much of a liberty with an original text. I was trying to figure out why on my own, but I couldn't find any really specific information about it. I did learn that in Hungarian first person, the pronoun is typically dropped because I think it's attached to the end of a verb, and the verb in Hungarian goes at the end of the sentence. So when it's implied who the subject is, the pronoun is just dropped. However, I also learned that third person pronouns are dropped in the same way, so maybe I'm not onto anything. I still think that choice is so interesting and blatant. There has to be a reason why. The obvious reasoning is that Magda Szabo just wanted Iraine to stand out more as a personal narrator. I just wonder why her. Anyways, enough about that. I did love this book. It was my fourth book by her, and I think it's my favorite, Usurping Abigail, although I do have Iz's Ballad and Night of the Pig Killing I have left to read by her. I think those two are her last fiction novels for adults anyways. I also really want to reread The Fawn by her because I disliked that book, and having read more of her work, I just think I have to be in the wrong on that. I need to revisit it at some point. I have certain authors who I love who are no longer alive and are writing. Even though I love them, I don't like to read all of their books in one go because I kind of feel I have to spread them out to enjoy them for longer. She's one of them, so who knows when I will pick up the next one, although I've heard wonderful things about Iz's Ballad. I'm very excited about that one. The next book I finished in September was We Love You Bunny by Mona Awad. A few of you asked why my title is different. This is the ARC. So I got this, wait a second, maybe I should explain ARC. ARC is advanced reader's copy, so sometimes a publisher will send out copies of a book before its release date to reviewers, people who like books. Usually they're the uncorrected version, but the same thing that you can pick up in a bookstore. We Love You Bunny is the prequel/sequel to Bunny by Mona Awad, which kind of has this cult-like following around it. So I do think many people were apprehensive about there being a sequel. Some people think that there didn't need to be one. And you know what? I do think that's valid because the existence of this book, this story, kind of disproved a lot of popular theories about Bunny and what was going on in that book. But I also think if you really loved Bunny, especially your interpretation of it, you can keep that sacred while also still enjoying the craziness of this new one. I also wanted to mention that I don't think that you can read this without reading Bunny first. I know that the publisher advertises this as a prequel, a sequel, and also a standalone book. I don't agree with that. I wanted to mention that because I did like We Love You Bunny more than Bunny. But for anyone watching who decides to read We Love You Bunny instead of Bunny, I think it could be quite confusing. They can advertise to and attract much more buyers of the book if they advertise it as a standalone. I really think that's the only reason why they've said that, because it doesn't make sense to me to call this a standalone book. There are so many references to the first book. The plot at some points relies heavily on the plot of the first book in order to move forward in this book. There are also Easter eggs throughout that won't make sense otherwise. I read Bunny for the first time maybe 3 or 4 years ago now. And then earlier this year, if you guys remember, I listened to the audiobook again in anticipation for the sequel, this one. Even having done that, there were many points where I got confused and I had to refer back to the first book to understand what they were alluding to. So yes, even though I think this one is better than Bunny, I still think you need to read Bunny first in order to fully enjoy this one. But also, you can do whatever you want. As for the plot, I'm going to summarize this without giving any spoilers to this book and also the first book. The narrator of the first book was Sam Samantha. In this book, the narrators are the 4 ladies who were in Sam's creative writing MFA program at Warren University, and also a 5th mysterious narrator. They've all already graduated from the program, and Sam has seen some success publishing a book. The problem is Sam's book is about these 4 ladies and their experiences. They're not happy about the way that Sam has written about them, how she barely tried to hide their identities, change their names, and so they want revenge. And they also want to tell their own story of what happened, and so that's what they do one by one. I laughed all throughout this book. I don't think that this is a book that should or needs to be taken seriously. In fact, if you do, it would ruin the story. Same with Bunny. You start to see some loopholes and you question whether you're suspending disbelief a bit too far. To be honest, those 2 things do ruin stories for me, but only if it's unintentional and the book is taking itself way too seriously. This is not taking itself seriously whatsoever, and I'm also not taking it seriously. I found it to be hilarious, witty, sharp, so caustic. I enjoyed the intentional eye-rolling of literature, art, writing, all of those things which I do love. It was funny. You can't make fun of this book because it's already doing so. I genuinely enjoyed it. However, I do think this is a very polarizing read, I've noticed. I did speak to some people who disliked it, and most of them could not get along with one of the narrators. I think they thought their section was a bit too long. The writing style was difficult to keep up with for a long time. I didn't have a problem, but I also think if those sections had been cut down, the book wouldn't have been worse off. Someone else told me they didn't like how the 4 ladies were portrayed here compared to how they were portrayed in the first book, Bunny. I guess there was more of a romantic, idealistic view of the 4 ladies in the first one, kind of. I also feel like they were very much a caricature in the first, and also in this one, even more so. My thinking is good people and bad people don't exist. Everyone is both. Of course, there are personal biases and also objective extremities, but characters who come across as perfect people while also supposedly emulating real people, for me, that's poor characterization. Also just flat and boring. I enjoyed the depth given to the ladies while also maintaining that humor, the caricature of them. My verdict is, this is a whole lot of fun. I still think the violin as person facial composite to be extremely funny. The last book I finished in September was, of course, The Last September by Elizabeth Bowen. Elizabeth Bowen. There's something about like the cadence or the structure of her sentences. I had this issue in Death of the Heart as well. Sometimes her writing just loses me. I have to actively zero in on each sentence. I don't know what it is. Once I do adjust and become accustomed to her writing style again, then it becomes easier. But yeah, there's always that initial adjustment period that threatens to lose me. I almost DNF'd this. So this book is set in Ireland during the 1920s amidst the Irish Independence War, and we are at a country home of some wealthy individuals. I believe these individuals are what is referred to as the English Irish, the Anglo-Irish, and from what I can gauge, they were not well liked by the Irish at this time. By the way, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going off of what I read in this book and also other books I've read set during this period. I don't have actual formal knowledge or research on this topic. I also think that there was some religion versus religion during this time because England were mostly Protestants, and I know that Ireland, the Irish, were mostly Catholics. And based on the characters in this book, it seems the Anglo-Irish were more attuned to British ways and not Irish ways, despite living in Ireland. Anyways, during this time, there was tension brewing between the British and the Irish. But all of these wealthy individuals staying at this country home, coming and going, they're kind of outside of that tension, danger. They're sheltered by their money and their privilege, or so they think. The main character is a young lady named Lois who's staying at this country home. She's meeting people, she's going to dances. Lois has that predicament that a lot of young people have. She doesn't know what she wants. I'll be honest, at first I could not stand Lois because she was so wishy-washy, just waffling around. She didn't know what she wants, and so she basically does nothing the entire time, can't make up her mind. I didn't start liking this book at all until about the midway point when I finally realized something. Yes, this is a coming-of-age story. It is also an extended allegory about Ireland and Britain. However, I do want to mention that I actually don't know for sure. This is just what I think is apparent. I'm just going to explain what I picked up from this. Like I said, Lois is very wishy-washy. She doesn't know what she wants. Should she marry this British man Gerald? That's the expected, normal, safe thing to do, right? Maybe? Why establish her independence and come into her own when she can just marry Gerald and get absorbed into his British world? So something that is very apparent about Lois is that she hates being defined. She fears it. She doesn't like when other people try to do it. Midway through this book, there is a scene where a British man is dancing with an Irish girl, and they have this short dialogue. That's when I realized, oh, okay, so this man represents Britain, this arrogant bully storming in and taking over, taking things that don't belong to them. On the other hand, Gerald represents a different side of Britain. Why doesn't Lois just give in? It's easier, she'll be protected, she'll be easily defined as Gerald's wife. You see where I'm going here with this allegory? At some point, Lois undergoes this mini transformation, and she decides that she wants to start something brand new in order to define herself independently. She wants to be her own person. Ireland doesn't want Britain. And then something happens to Gerald, our British army captain. I think that's what he was. No, maybe he wasn't a captain, or he was something. He was like a soldier. Something happens to him, and that cemented the allegory for me. I'm sorry if what I'm saying sounds vague. I don't want to give away any spoilers. Once I realized all of this, the story clicked, and then I liked it way more. It was like the heavens opened up, and I understood why the characters were so wishy-washy, waffling around. Actually, I wouldn't say that I enjoyed this. Maybe the right term is appreciated. I appreciated it. Yeah, even though I do find Elizabeth Bowen's writing to be elusive at times, I did underline quite a lot of lines that I enjoyed in this. That's the thing. Everything seems vague, and then something remarkable will stand out. I am intrigued by Elizabeth Bowen. I do want to read more by her. Let me know if you're familiar with her writing, what I should read next. And if you've also read this, let me know what you think of my interpretation. As for my October reads, I'm still meandering my way through History by Elsa Morante. Recently, I've been reluctant to pick this one up because it's not spooky. It doesn't feel right to be reading this in the fall. However, I am enjoying it, and I've come so far that it would be a waste to DNF it right now. Or pause it, rather. I'm just taking my time and not putting much pressure on myself, one chapter a day. I've also been listening to / reading the Penguin Book of Ghost Stories. Enjoying this. Most of the stories were written in the 1800s, and they're not overtly scary or gruesome. They're all so far using ghosts as a metaphor for some social commentary. But it's been entertaining listening to while walking or doing my makeup. I did start The Sundial by Shirley Jackson. Guys, no one told me that this is the best book she's ever written. I'm halfway done, and I genuinely think that this is her best. My favorite used to be Hang Saman. I think it's been overtaken. This is creepy, intense, but more importantly, this is hilarious. I think that this is like the funniest book ever. And unlike Elizabeth Bowen, this is flowing for me. It's a page turner. I cannot wait for bedtime today. I have about 100 pages left, and I think I'm gonna finish it tonight. I also have The October Country by Ray Bradbury I'm excited to read. I kind of jokingly mentioned that I want to read books that have the names of the months in the title, like the last September, light in August, but I got a lot of great recommendations from you guys. This was one recommendation. Someone also recommended me November by Flaubert. I loved Madame Bovary. Flaubert, did I say that correctly? From what I can gauge from the summary, this seems to be a story about nostalgia and lost love as an older man looks back on his life. That is exactly the kind of activity that you would do in November. I'm also going on a Pride and Prejudice trip with my friend. I decided that by myself. My friend hasn't read Pride and Prejudice. I just decided privately that the theme is going to be Pride and Prejudice. But anyways, I want to reread Pride and Prejudice. I think I've mentioned this many times. I read this as a young girl. I want to read it again as a grown woman and see how I feel about it. I do remember that I didn't exactly love this as a little girl. I preferred Persuasion and Northanger Abbey, but we'll see if my feelings change. Also, I've noticed that nearly all of the Pride and Prejudice covers that exist are unsightly. Even the vintage ones. Like, this one is okay, but it could be better. I've been saving this all year for fall. Quartet in Autumn by Barbara Pym. I think this is going to be a heartwarming story about old age, which I just love stories like that. I think this will be a happy read for autumn, a warm, cozy read. Most of my books are vintage and old copies, and I just hate when the spine has split and dried out like that. Sometimes I tape it to keep the pages intact. So if anyone knows how I can easily fix a cracked, dried out spine like that, please let me know. I know there's a method of removing the spine and kind of gluing it back together and creating a new spine. I'm also very excited to read The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I was debating between this one and The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. I can easily change my mind though. Let me know if I should choose The Woman in White over this one. This is about a governess who is watching two children, and she believes that there are evil spirits within the house. The Aspern Papers is about a man who is trying to get hold of some poems, and he will do anything to get them. I have Caroline Blackwood's The Fate of Mary Rose. Caroline Blackwood is one of my favorite authors, and I don't think I've read a single book by her this year. She's very similar to Shirley Jackson. She's like the British counterpart. Wait a second, she's Anglo-Irish. The premise of this book sounds much more morbid than I was expecting. It's about a child that gets abducted, and I think the town kind of dissolves into like mass hysteria. I have Elizabeth Taylor's A Soul of Kindness. This sounds very similar to Angel by Elizabeth Taylor, which is one of my favorite reads from last year. So Angel of that book believed that she was this great writer and a great person in general. And it says here that Flora, the main character, believes that she is the soul of kindness. She appears to be this perfect person, and someone is onto her. I also have The Finishing School by Meryl Spark. I love Meryl Spark. She is so wily. I saw that a biography is coming out on her. I'm so excited. So this is about a creative writing teacher who is working on his book. He's been working on it for a while, I believe. And then he gets a student who is this literary prodigy. He's about to publish a book, and already all the publishers, all the editors, they're all after this book. They want it. There's so much hype building for it, and the teacher is jealous. Lastly, Barbara Common's The Skin Chairs. I went to great effort to get this book, and I'm kind of scared to read it. I just don't want to be disappointed, but I don't think I would be. It sounds similar to Sisters by River, so I think it's going to be like sharp and humorous. It's about a family whose father passes away, and so the mother and the children have to move to some relative's house. It says the aunt is a bully. She's compared to a horse. Anyways, that's all I have to talk to you about today. Let me know what you guys are reading, what you're planning to read in October, what you loved reading in September, and I hope we all have a great reading month in October.